Hello, and thanks for joining us for this week's Northwest Newsweek. I'm Riley McManus. The Special Investigations Unit has cleared 2 officers from the Dryden Police Services following their probe of an incident on September 30th, in which 33 shots were fired by the officers at a suspect ramming them with his vehicle. The officers were responding to an assault at a Thunder Lake residence when they exited their cruiser. The suspect jumped into a parked pickup truck and then drove directly into their vehicle, causing it to strike one of the officers. They sought cover in nearby trees and fired their guns at the truck as the driver attempted another run at them before getting wedged into the trees. The driver then got out and was handcuffed, but not before threatening to kill the officers. The suspect was taken to hospital with fractured ribs, but no gunshot wounds, while one officer was treated for ankle injuries. The driver, 40-year-old Jack Kelly, was later charged with attempted murder and other offenses. The SIU has now concluded both officers were justified in discharging their firearms to protect themselves, and no charges will be laid. At least one person is homeless and fortunately not hurt following an early evening fire in Dryden Tuesday, which destroyed a trailer on the city's north side. The fire broke out shortly before 7 o'clock that evening, and despite the bitter cold and high winds, firefighters were able to keep the damage limited to the trailer and have the fire extinguished within 2 hours. Fire Chief Chris Wood says fires in trailer parks can be very difficult due to narrow access points and trailers being in close proximity to each other, but crews were able to begin the attack quickly before the fire could spread any further.
25 members responded with 8 trucks, and so we got there to a working fire, reports of a working fire, a fully involved trailer. And so on arrival, we were told that everybody was out. So that's an older part of town, so definitely the older buildings definitely burn a lot quicker. We had a nice fast attack, so at least we still kept the structure kind of intact, but it's definitely a total loss.
The cause of the fire is not known at this time. However, Wood said investigators were back there Wednesday to examine the scene in the daylight. Few details are being released regarding a workplace fatality associated with the Wata power line project. A worker was found dead just last Wednesday at a remote work site almost 400 kilometers north of Pickle Lake, near Muskrat Dam First Nation. The Ministry of Labour says the worker was employed by Ballard Construction, along with a secondary employer, K&L Contracting. A ministry inspector attended the scene with the OPP on Friday, and 6 work orders were issued to Ballard the next day. The investigation is ongoing, and Wata officials are expressing condolences to the family of the worker. Conservative MP for Kenora says it's time for the trucker protest in the national capital to come to an end. Eric Melillo was in Ottawa for the past week carrying out his parliamentary duties.
It's certainly not a decision for me to make, but I think it's definitely come the time that the protesters move on at this point.
The protest convoy passed through Melillo's riding on January 25th and 26th, and he expressed support for their cause, saying he opposed vaccine mandates for transport drivers. The convoys converged in Ottawa last weekend, and Melillo says he's chatted with protesters on his way to Parliament each day. Besides impending traffic in the capital, some people have been seen disrespecting statues and monuments, carrying Nazi flags. Melillo criticized those actions on social media, and he's now speaking about the need for the truckers and others to pack up and leave Ottawa.
It's been almost a week, I think, at this point, and the protest, although it is peaceful from my experience, walking through this every day this week, it is peaceful, but it's clearly blocking critical infrastructure, and to me that is an area where we don't want to see any protest block critical infrastructure, whether it's roads, in town, highways, bridges, railways, and obviously law enforcement has the tools and the duty to intervene if they feel necessary. So
the landscape has definitely changed as preliminary work has begun on the 4-laning of Highway 17 between the Manitoba border and the city of Kenora. Crews are clearing the trees that once lined the highway in preparation for the next phase of the project, which will involve landscaping and blasting rocks. The current work area is a 5-kilometer stretch from the border to Gundy Road. The twinning of the highway there has been a pet project of Kenora Rainy River MPP Greg Rickford for over a decade, dating back to when he was still the federal MP for the area. Rickford says he's excited to see the roadway expansions that improve safety, and he remains adamant that the 4-laning near Kenora is the way to go.
But the twinning is the way we want to go out in northwestern Ontario. The Indigenous communities feel the same way, and so that's what we're focused on. The good news is that we're building out the highways in an appropriate manner for northern Ontario. This is the only link across this entire country that is not served by a twin highway.
The work is being done by members of the First Nations located in and around the Kenora area, several of whom received funding from the province in November to build capacity for a workforce. Despite claims that the province has reached its peak in the Omicron wave, the Northwestern Health Unit's medical officer of health says cases there are still rising, and the area won't be at its peak for some time. Active cases in the NWHU were at 288 as of Friday. The 7-day positivity rate has dropped to 18.9%, and there are currently 3 institutional outbreaks in that region. Dr. Kit Young-Hoon is standing firm that her catchment area has yet to see the worst of the Omicron, due to the loosening of restrictions provincially and the Northwest typically lagging behind the Southern Ontario for most COVID trends.
The last week of December, while the provincially the increase was being noted early, sometime towards the end of the first week of December. So we are about 10 days to 2 weeks behind with respect to the curve, the Omicron curve. So that could be one of the reasons why we're different.
Young-Hoon is glad to see that over 61% of children aged 5 to 11 have had their first dose of the vaccine. She adds that they will continue to reduce the number of large-scale vaccination clinics, shifting to more targeted outreach. After record highs for COVID-19 emissions in the last 2 weeks, the Thunder Bay Regional Hospital seems to be trending in the right direction for cases of the virus. The hospital has fewer patients within their confines, but more in the intensive care unit, especially those who are unvaccinated. Corey Nordstrom has the latest.
The number of patients admitted to the Thunder Bay Regional Hospital with COVID-19 has finally seen a significant decline after seeing record numbers as high as 52 on Tuesday. Going into the weekend, hospital officials announced they have just 43 COVID-positive patients. 9 of those are in the ICU. Hospital capacity is now at 101.5%, with ICU capacity at 86.4%.
It's been the most significant and sustained highs that we've seen over the past 10 to 14 days. So that's been a little bit new to us. That said, we are seeing those numbers come down a little bit. It's the last couple of days that we've only seen single-digit admissions for COVID-19.
But Crocker-Ellicott says one important piece of information is not seen in their daily reportings, and that's the effect of COVID-19 on people no longer deemed an active case.
That doesn't necessarily account for individuals that continue to remain in hospital once their COVID infectious disease period clears. So although there are 9 COVID positive in ICU, very often we have a few additional patients in ICU or in other parts of the organization that still require care for COVID related illness. And as of yesterday, for example, that number was 29.
The hospital's CEO is hopeful the downward trend in cases can be seen across the province and they can soon get back to doing non-urgent surgeries.
The thought is that the province may shift that directive to in a phase 2 approach. So hoping to see mid-February, late February, maybe see some resumption of some of that surgical and procedural care that's been put on hold.
Crocker-Ellicott is also urging the public to get their COVID shot, as 62% of intensive care patients are unvaccinated. Corey Nordstrom, TBT News.
When we come back, the MP for Kenora reacts to the sudden dismissal of the leader of his party. The Conservative MP for Kenora says he wasn't really surprised by his party's caucus vote, which saw Aaron O'Toole go from current to former leader of the party. O'Toole required at least 51% support to survive. Instead, 73 of the 119 Conservative MPs voted in favor of ousting him. Many have cited O'Toole's lackluster performance in the last year's election and flip-flopping on key party issues. Eric Melillo supported O'Toole when he campaigned for the leadership in 2020, following the ouster of Andrew Scheer. He says despite less than 1% of the overall party making the final decision, he believes and respects that the Reform Act was followed properly. Melillo also doesn't believe this week's events have created a rift within the party, noting the hardest part is now over.
On what our path forward is, I think that's that debate and that discussion is healthy. I think that's what we need in a democracy. But I'm confident we'll come together, united under Candace Bergen as the interim leader, and of course we'll rally around whoever is going to be elected leader later on.
Melillo is uncertain as to when a new leader will be chosen and says he hasn't been approached by anyone looking for his support yet. The lives of both children and seniors in the Kenora area are about to improve significantly, following several announcements from Kenora Rainy River MPP Greg Rickford this week. With a new park to be built on an area First Nation and access at another in the city to be improved, as well a community paramedicine program which aims to bring stress off the hospital and long-term care homes in the area. Adam Riley has more.
It may just be an empty field now on the Wishishkanigam First Nation, but very soon it will become a hub of community activity, following an announcement by Kenora Rainy River MPP Greg Rickford of $395,000 through the Ontario Trillium Fund. Chief Chris Skeed says since being re-elected as chief, he believes he must do everything he can for his community. He calls this an investment for the children.
At the end of the day, I think each kid should have a very happy childhood, and I know this construction here in behind me here is the area that we're looking at actually have a lot of good plans for, working with our education department, specifically the Jordan's principal.
In addition to a playground, the project will also include a skate park and basketball court located beside the community center. Meanwhile, in Kenora at the Norman Park, Rickford announced another $269,000 to revamp the park and make it fully accessible. Mayor Dan Reynard says the city has eyed a project like this for some time and is excited to see it come together, as he believes it will break new ground in the region.
The project will start once the snow starts melting, which hopefully will be earlier because we've all had enough of -40, and it will be in place. So as far as we know, it's definitely going to be the first fully accessible park in Kenora for sure. We believe in northwestern Ontario.
Reynard expects the project to be complete for 2023. On Tuesday, Rickford also announced an expansion of the community paramedicine program in Kenora, similar to an announcement he made in Fort Frances last year. He says it will offer many different services handled by paramedics to improve life for older residents.
It services the Indigenous communities local to us as well, helping to keep seniors and elders in their homes as long as they want to, and of course reducing the premature transition into alternative levels of care facilities and or the hospital. So we believe this is the new frontier of delivering health.
Rickford continued his tour of the region with stops in Mayshon to announce improvements for the Woodland Arena and infrastructure announcements to the Dryden Fire Services Hall No. 2, worth $90,000 and $91,000 respectively, through the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund Corporation, of which Rickford is the chair of. Adam Riley, TBT News.
A new kindergarten to grade 12 school in Rainy River could mean the old high school is being repurposed as a municipal office, leading to a number of benefits for locals. Rainy River Mayor Deb Ewald says council still needs to approve the move of the town office. Relocating it to the current high school would see more space for activities for a number of local groups. A designated council chamber could be created, and the town's fix-it shop used by a large number of seniors would be moved to a more central location. It also opens up room in the current town office.
And the seniors are both in the old train station. So, and we've done a lot of work to restore that. So that would be perfect as a tourist information bureau and a railway museum and maybe possibly a birding museum. That's something else.
Construction on the new school will begin in the spring, with completion slated for the fall of 2023, meaning Rainy River Council has some time to decide on moving the town office. Elections Canada has apologized for its actions that's left voters in 3 remote First Nations in the Kenora riding unable to cast their ballots during last year's snap federal election. In its report presented in the House of Commons this week, Election Canada says Cat Lake, Poplar Hill, and Pikangikum First Nations did not have polling stations on election days as initially communicated to the communities. The leaders of those First Nations informed the agency that many residents would be away participating in traditional hunting activities, and voting services were moved up a week into advance poll to account for the hunt. But the change came too late in the election period, and the new voting cards reflecting the date change could not be issued in those communities, which resulted in some voters not knowing about the date change and therefore being unable to vote. Elections Canada says better communication efforts must be made for future elections, and it will be reviewing how the agency engages and services Indigenous electors. A more depth report on the events in the Kenora riding will be released at a later date. Coming up after the break, a resident of Dryden returns home with hopes of innovation of the community's agricultural past. The best time for many residents in northwestern Ontario to get fresh, locally sourced herbs, fruits, vegetables is the summer or during the fall harvest. But now, after spending almost 20 years abroad, Benjamin Fagan has returned home to Dryden to not only be closer to family, but also to bring fresh produce 365 days a year. As Adam Riley explains, Architect North stands to revamp and revolutionize the agricultural opportunities in the community and the region.
For the first time, we'll be able to buy fresh produce from our grocery stores year-round instead of it being seasonal.
The former Parks Department building in Dryden has new occupants with big ambitions. Agritech North CEO Benjamin Fagan says within a couple of months, this gray and brown warehouse will be a laboratory-like setting with centerpieces of lush green produce plants similar to the ones seen here.
We hope to put substantial renovations into the building that will increase the insulating properties of the building and seal it off from the outdoors, so that way we don't have any risks of pests. And then we'll be installing PVC panels, for example, that'll allow us to wash everything down.
Fagan says vertical farming is new to the region, and through that method, the 4,400 square foot facility will be able to grow the equivalent of 5 acres of crops, which, as master grower Fabian Velez explains, will be a variety.
Fairy tale eggplant, the sun-gold tomato, the black strawberry, cherry tomato. We're bringing in cucamelons, which are miniature watermelons that look like but taste like cucumber. But we're bringing all these varieties that have thinner skin because they're packed with flavor.
Fagan notes in addition to the variety, there will also be some environmental and health benefits from their facility and growing practices.
So we'll be one of the most sustainable farming operations in the world. So we use 90% less water, 60% less nutrients, no chemical herbicides, fungicides, or pesticides.
We're at predatory pests just in case if we do have some uninvited guests. Pretty much using nature to fight nature, but at the same time be as natural as we can with nature.
Despite being known as a pulp and paper town, Dryden was initially settled with agriculture in mind. In addition to bringing fresh produce year-round, Agritech looks to also improve access and costs for remote First Nations, where fresh produce can be disturbingly expensive.
Distribution often adds costs, especially when going to the far north communities. We're also working on funding applications to put in infrastructure for perishable good transportation throughout the region.
Fagan and Velez also have their sights set on providing educational opportunities in the future for students at both the secondary and post-secondary level. Adam Riley, TBT News.
Kenora MP Eric Melillo is calling on the Trudeau government to do more to repair and replace substandard housing on remote First Nations. The call comes 1 week after the Canadian Medical Association Journal released a report linking health problems in Indigenous children with the homes they're being forced to live in.
Mr. Speaker, last week a report by the Canadian Medical Association Journal linked substandard housing in remote First Nations to health problems in children. Overcrowding, poor ventilation, structural damage and mold are far too common in housing on First Nations in northwestern Ontario. Children living in these homes were found to have high rates of respiratory illnesses and hospitalizations, Mr. Speaker. It's something that Indigenous leaders and community residents have been saying for years, and it's why Canada's Conservatives have been advocating for immediate action to end this housing crisis. Today I want to echo the report's calls to increase the housing stock and improve existing homes in First Nations, as well as its calls for action on food insecurity, unsafe drinking water, and the need to create economic opportunities on reserve. Mr. Speaker, Indigenous communities have been neglected and underfunded for far too long. The government must take action now.
An International Falls man has been arrested following an assault at a Fort Frances business. The incident happened shortly after 3 o'clock Thursday afternoon, when a 67-year-old Stephen McDonald attended a Portage Avenue South business and assaulted a person with a weapon. In addition to an assault charge, he had also been charged with importing a firearm, prohibited or restricted weapons, and unauthorized possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose. The Canada Border Service Agency is assisting with the investigation, and McDonald has since been remanded into custody and being held under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. A long-time mystery involving a pair of stolen Norval Morso paintings now has a happy ending. The two artworks were stolen from Confederation College 40 years ago and have finally been returned. Back in 2018, local college officials were contacted by a Toronto-based art curator who recognized the stolen paintings after a colleague in Quebec offered to sell them to her. This launched an investigation involving the Thunder Bay Police, the Sûreté de Québec, and the head of public safety at Confederation College. Together, they were able to locate photos that identified the same paintings that were on the walls at the college back in the late 1970s. The paintings are now back in Thunder Bay, and officials at both the college and the art gallery are happy that the paintings have returned home.
For the community, it's wonderful that the college was able to facilitate the return of this work. I think it'll have a real impact that they can come back here to Thunder Bay after so many years away.
Norval Morrissel's obviously from the Thunder Bay area, and it's a great success story here for the college and for the community and the Indigenous community here to have these paintings finally back where they belong, and for people to be able to go and view these paintings. They're beautiful paintings.
The 2 stolen paintings will be unveiled at the college once in-person public events are allowed again. The artworks will later be added to the Norval Morrisel collection at the Thunder Bay Art Gallery, which will now have 119 paintings and prints. That collection, including the 2 stolen pieces, will be available for public viewing later this spring. And that wraps up this week's Northwest Newsweek. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again.